With Final Fantasy IX possibly getting a remake, and Final Fantasy VII currently in full swing, Final Fantasy VIII fans are left wondering, has Square forgotten them? Obviously Final Fantasy VII is getting a lot of love right now from Square, with some spin-off games being released, along with Final Fantasy VII Remake, Rebirth, and the third game that is coming in that remake trilogy. Final Fantasy IX's 25th anniversary is happening in just a few weeks, and Square are teasing us with a Final Fantasy IX anniversary website dedicated to that occasion, along with the fact that we expect a Final Fantasy IX remake to be announced very soon. So I guess the question we're asking today is, why not Final Fantasy VIII? Let's look into it. Now, Final Fantasy VIII was released back in 1999 on the PS1, and it did have some big shoes to fill because it was following in the huge commercial and critical success of its predecessor FF7. Fortunately for Square, it also had a commercially strong release, selling over 9 million copies worldwide. However, it's important to note that they did take some big risks, because Final Fantasy VIII introduced a radically different tone and style of structure than its predecessor. A few examples, but certainly not an exhaustive list. First off, it brought in some huge changes to the art style, with much more realistic character models and backgrounds. It enhanced the cinematic storytelling and brought in a school-based structure using Balam Garden and the Seed system, and it was less conspicuous with its romance story with Squall and Rinoa's relationship. And to be honest, all of that was pretty much well received. The problem was when it came to the gameplay. This is where we got quite a bit of division amongst the fans. Primarily the draw and junction system, which many would consider to be too overly complex, and the second thing was the level scaling, which just flat out made grinding counterproductive, one of the core aspects that was considered to be part of the JRPG genre at the time. Now, from an objective point of view of this video, I'm by no means trying to make Final Fantasy VIII out as a bad game. I'm sure you will have your opinions on that. I'm just trying to stress that it was a bold and divisive game, and that may be why Square is hesitant to revisit it in any special way. But let's establish some context here by discussing the current disparity. We are getting a multi-year celebration of Final Fantasy VII, with the full remake trilogy in the works, the release of Crisis Core Reunion, which I absolutely love by the way, Ever Crisis, which if I'm honest wasn't really for me, and with a whole bunch of new merch, concerts, themed events. Square are certainly taking Final Fantasy VII's legacy seriously. Final Fantasy IX, Square in March 2025 launched the 25th anniversary website, and they've been updating that regularly. In fact, just recently they released some new character bios and some new artwork as well. And with more announcements promised by Square before the actual anniversary date of July the 7th, it seems we are getting strong hints that the currently unannounced Final Fantasy IX remake is soon to show its face. But now when it comes to Final Fantasy VIII, well, what can we say? We got somewhat of a mediocre remaster back in 2019, and then for its 25th anniversary last year, we got a tweet from Square Enix about that, and they uploaded the opening FMV to their YouTube channel, but that's it. That's all the fanfare Square have given Final Fantasy VIII. So what we should do is perhaps delve a little deeper into some of those issues that has made Final Fantasy VIII a more divisive entry in the series, and therefore is making Square a little more hesitant to do much with it. Primarily the junction and draw mechanics, and the way this works is that spells would be equipped to stats, that would be junctioning, and those spells would be drawn from enemies. Now, it was actually an innovative idea, and I think on paper it's one of those things that kind of looks like it would work really well, and yet when it came to in practice, it just didn't have perhaps that fun that was initially intended, and the whole system ended up being completely unbalanced as well. It was very tedious, and in some cases you would even have to grind for many hours at a time as you were drawing spells from enemies, and the fact that spells were a consumable item that were also equipped to stats means that the game was actively encouraging you not to cast the spells that you collected, which seems somewhat weird. And this was an integral part of the game, which means if there was a remake, I don't think the junctioning and draw system would be removed. It would have to be present because it's part of the DNA of Final Fantasy VIII, but it could certainly be streamlined and improved. For example, we could have auto draw, and maybe spells aren't consumable, so once you've drawn them, you've got them for life. And the other thing that turned out to be a bit of an issue was the level scaling. Now, just straight off the bat, I think a lot of people were opposed to level scaling. In fact, it was effectively better not to level up your party at all, because as you leveled up with the enemies, then the enemies would actually overpower you, even to the point where leveling up made the game harder, not easier, which again just seems completely counterintuitive to the genre. But even if the level scaling was balanced, it's still a system that feels out of place in a Final Fantasy game. And indeed, I've noticed since Final Fantasy VIII that Square haven't really been quick to revisit that in their later games. So these gameplay systems, plus a number of other reasons, I think has led Square to pretty much send Final Fantasy VIII to the back burner and not focus or invest any additional money into it. Now, we did get that remaster that I mentioned in 2019. Unfortunately, that also wasn't great. Now, it was wonderful for those of us that enjoy Final Fantasy VIII for what it is, to be able to have a reason to play the game once more, but the actual remastered nature of it was so minimal and basic that it also left a bit of a sour taste. The main problem with that was that they did update the main character models. Unfortunately, the pixelated backgrounds were left exactly as they used to be, which meant we had this stark contrast of slightly more modernised characters against the old style backgrounds, which just did not work well at all in my opinion, but also a sign that just once more Square are not willing to invest into Final Fantasy VIII in a way that many fans feel that that game could do with. Now, Square Enix's official position is to simply say that right now there are no plans for a Final Fantasy VIII remake, and actually Naoki Hamaguchi, who is one of the co-directors of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, said to IGN in December 2024, there are currently no plans for a Final Fantasy VIII remake. So that's about as forthcoming as it gets. However, a few months prior, in February 2024, Yoshinori Kitase said in an IGN interview that he would actually be up for revisiting Final Fantasy VIII, but only if several systems could be fully reworked. So he mentioned the battle system and the level system and the junction systems, as we've spoke about. However, he also clarified that such a project would be a huge investment and that Square would have to think about such things carefully. But the public signals from Square are very much clear, I think. Final Fantasy VII is getting tons of love. Final Fantasy IX looks like it's going to be getting a substantial moment in the spotlight. But Final Fantasy VIII has definitely been relegated to the bottom of the list. It doesn't even seem to get much in terms of merchandising opportunities. I think it's clear that Square, with their business hat on, are saying that FF8 just isn't worth the immense investment that fans would love to see. And in terms of what fans would actually like to see in a Final Fantasy VIII revamp, well, obviously I don't want to speak for you personally, but running a Final Fantasy based channel with a bit of a community, I have seen a lot of comments over the years. But I think generally some wishlist items would be true HD visuals with fully rebuilt environments, voice acting, at least for the key scenes, but an important caveat would be to be able to disable this, as not everybody would want it, a modern turn-based combat system, and a refined junction system with less of a grind but more intuitive gameplay. I also believe it is an objective fact that Final Fantasy VIII has a loyal and vocal fan base, and they simply want their game to be treated with a similar level of respect and care that we're seeing with the other PS1 era classics. For some closing thoughts, what I will say is that Final Fantasy VIII isn't perfect. I don't know many people who would say that it is, but it is bold, it is unique, and it is still beloved by millions of people. Its story, its setting, its characters, and yes, even its systems have helped to play a part in shaping an era. So the fact it is the only Final Fantasy game that was originally released on PS1 that isn't getting a second chance to shine in the limelight is very disappointing. And with Final Fantasy VII in full swing and FF9 stirring excitement, are Final Fantasy VIII fans just going to be left perpetually waiting and wondering? And do you think that Square is unfairly overlooking Final Fantasy VIII? Or do you think they're still gauging the public mood and are just waiting for the right time to do it justice? And ultimately, if they did remake this adventure, how would you want them to do it? What would you want changed or evolved, and what would you want to be kept exactly the same? Please do drop your thoughts in the comments. As always, I love to hear what our community thinks. But thank you for stopping by, checking out the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for future updates, and I'll see you in the next one.